Fantastic.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the BariAftercare podcast. And I have a guest with us that you guys just loved. And I loved because I've gotten to work with Katie before, but you loved and sent in so many great questions. So, welcome back, Katie Chapmon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. It was really, really fun last time. So I am absolutely thrilled and honored to be back again. And yeah, it's
Wasn't
fun.
it fun to get the questions? I was like, oh
Yeah,
my gosh. And the
yeah,
feedback, like,
yeah.
oh gosh, the way you broke it down was so understandable. It was understandable to me and it was understandable to the listeners. And so they wrote back and asked
Yeah.
questions. So we're going to go
Love
ahead and
it.
start with their questions. And then we want to talk about the gut and insulin resistance because
Yeah,
so many bariatric patients struggle with insulin resistance.
yeah,
So I want to talk about that. And then if we have time, gut and other hormones.
yeah. We can go there.
I'm telling you. Have you started your book yet?
You know, it's that's been percolating in the back of my head at
I
some
think it
point.
I think it should happen because seriously, when we met
Yeah.
last time and I mentioned to you and listeners
Yeah.
mentioned back that it's such a complicated topic, but you
Yeah.
made it so easy to understand. And this is something that I don't care who you are,
Yeah.
your gut biome definitely affects your life. So this applies to every single
Absolutely.
person, bariatric patient or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also I recognize too that if someone had a little bit of something happening or something was a little off before surgery, then oftentimes it kind of shows up a little bit more afterwards for people. And so it is, as so many wonderful things are changing and happening post bariatric surgery, this can be that subject that's like, well, it's surgery, but I had it before, and what's it about? Nothing major's wrong, but
Right.
yeah, it can definitely affect your life.
All right. So pre or
Yeah,
post op
yeah,
or any human
and they,
alive. We're going to talk
yeah,
more about gut biome. So if you didn't hear the first one, please go back and educate yourself on some of the basic stuff we talked about last time and then follow up with this one, or it probably doesn't matter which way you go, but here we go. So I wanted to ask now I have these questions from listeners, but I also wrote down some of my own because
perfect.
I've been thinking about some things and wanting to get your opinion about this.
Great, Connie. I was like, this is great.
I know. Somebody asked about a postbiotic.
Yeah.
So we talked last time about the other three,
Hmm.
right? What were
Yep.
those? The pre,
Pre.
the
Actually, a probiotic
oh yeah, the pre, the pro.
and then a symbiotic.
Yes, that's right, symbiotic. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is this
Well,
business of a
those-
postbiotic?
there's all these biotics. And so
Wow.
how do we keep them straight and what are they used for pretty much?
Yeah,
So
do that quick synopsis of the pre, the post, and, you know, real quick
yeah.
synopsis of the three majors
Yeah.
we talked
So what I look at is like, right, we have all these like gut bacteria hanging out in our gut, and we want really like good bacteria, good normal flora. So a probiotic is basically adding people to that party,
right?
and a prebiotic is feeding those people at that party. So, some good appetizers there. And then a symbiotic is actually both combined. So it has probiotics and prebiotics
Okay.
together. So that's kind of, if we think of it like that, it helps us to kind of differentiate, between what each thing is and does.
Okay.
So a postbiotic it's a thing, because I saw that in the question. Is it even a real
Ding,
thing? I'm like,
everybody, yay!
it's a thing. It is. So a postbiotic is a byproduct of those bacteria
Okay.
after they eat,
All
and it
right.
adds to the whole system. Okay. So just think like all your bacteria in there, right? Food comes in and they eat, chomp, chomp, chomp. And then a postbiotic is that byproduct of given after that's digested
Okay.
and fermented. And
Okay.
then it switches into something and gives it back to the system.
Okay.
So I maybe think about this is like, okay, if someone has a really great appetizer at that
Mm-hmm.
party, all
Mm-hmm.
right, they like have it, they eat it, they're like, okay, great. And then they're like, you know what? That was so good. I'm going to make this in a little bit different way, but for my family.
Okay.
Okay. So they're taking that, you're
Mhm.
digesting it, and then putting a twist on it, but
Okay.
helping the system.
Okay. So that goes back into our system.
Hmm.
So a postbiotic is what happens when your body does its thing, given what it has and what you're feeding it.
Correct.
So
Correct.
do these postbiotics cause the issues?
Not necessarily if it is a so when we think kind of biotic, okay, usually that's talking about our good bacteria.
Okay.
So let's kind
Okay.
of differentiate this a little bit.
All right.
So when we talk about our good bacteria, that's like, oh, I'm going to eat this appetizer and this was so great. I'm going to make it and put my little twist on it and feed my family with it. And I'm helping out.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. It's
So
good and
that's
helpful.
good, helpful.
Okay.
Okay. And then when you're talking about like, hey, what about like problems or stuff like that? So our kind of bad bacteria or not so awesome bacteria, they do a similar function, let's say, right? They
Mhm.
eat like what's coming in the body. They like are
Right.
like chomp, chomp, chomp.
Mhm.
And then they give off byproducts that are not helpful to the
Okay.
system.
Got it.
So that could be like, oh, they're gas producers. So they're going to give off a lot of gas when they eat that same food.
Okay.
Okay. So, or they're going to give off more signaling that signals inflammation, or they're going to produce histamines and it'll make someone more sensitive
Ah,
to their food
okay.
because as they chomp chomp chomp, your body's like, oh, I see histamines in my body, and just think of like allergies and we take an antihistamine for it. That's the
Right.
signal for
Okay.
our body to go, okay, we're going to be reactive to that. So a
Okay.
postbiotic is a positive thing. So I'm going to put it on this side, right?
Okay.
Positive. We make food, we feed our family, we're just
All
all in
right.
it together. And then byproduct of our bad
Okay.
bacteria is over here. That is where we're going to see something more problematic to our system
Okay.
or uncomfortable to our system.
Okay.
Does that help?
That helps. Now, so a postbiotic is not a supplement
So
that you take by mouth.
can it can come
Really?
in a supplement form.
How in the world does that work?
Hmm. So some of our like good stuff that is given back into our system are are natural things like a short chain fatty acid,
Okay.
okay, which is a
I'm
type
just gonna trust you on that.
of fatty acid. I was just like, whew, there's a complicated like what goes in that form,
Right.
or it's an inactive bacteria
Okay.
that kind of sits in there and takes up space. So it acts like a buffer.
Okay.
So other bad bacteria can't take up that space.
Okay.
So
So
there can be postbiotics.
So when would you want to take one of those?
So, right, great question, because I determined that for the ones last time,
Right.
and I'll tell everyone go back to the other episode, because I
Right.
was like, it's definitely a thing to break down and see how
Yes.
you feel. So, so when someone will utilize or take a postbiotic, would be more so after they've taken like a pre or pro or symbiotic. Like if they're
Okay.
feeling uncomfortable and they're like, oh, I'm going to utilize this to help switch around my microbiome,
Okay.
then, right, as I said last time, I don't want to just be on something for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I want to usually filter some time off, some time
Right.
on, because I don't want
Right.
to overpopulate my party. That's not a fun party going
No.
on there. So, what I might do is I might go, oh, okay, let me switch out to a postbiotic. So, I might have some fillers in at the
Oh, I see.
party that
Okay.
don't, um, that aren't like overcrowding or overstimulating the party. They just are like,
Okay.
some people
They're
in the
the
corner.
wallflowers.
That's right. Some people in the corner that like fill in that blank. So I might utilize that. Um, or gosh, if I get really in the weeds, I will, if I'm really looking at someone's microbiome and maybe I'm doing a test for it, then
Right.
I'm knowing exactly like, okay, I'm using this for this and this is the reason why.
Okay.
Because there's certain bacteria that are what I would consider keystone bacteria, because I was like, oh, this is the one that makes
Culprit.
all those postbiotics.
Okay.
Like this is the one that really like goes to cooking school and makes the best appetizers.
Okay.
And man, I want to support that one and support the system. So I'm going to use a postbiotic.
Okay. All right. So what if you have a very rude postbiotic at the party that has been so here's what I'm thinking of it with the party.
Yeah,
You've got
yeah.
your party guests and you've got your
Uh-huh.
really great party people. They're polite, they're mingling, they're adding, and those would be the healthy bacteria.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And then we've got this group of people at the party who are kind of rude and they're just a little bit on the obnoxious side. So
Yeah.
those would be the less than healthy bacteria.
Hmm.
They both eat the appetizers.
Yep.
They both produce postbiotic whatevers. Some of them are going to feed your family and be helpful,
Hmm.
and some of them are going to be culprits.
Not as helpful. Yeah, they're going to be. I would say that the good, that's always a postbiotic.
Okay.
The other is just byproduct,
Okay.
like
Oh,
byproduct
that's right, because
waste.
biotic is healthy.
Biotic
Okay,
is
so those
awesome.
obnoxious guests are gonna make byproducts.
Yep,
Now, could those byproducts create some of the problem?
absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
gas
And
and
if we
bloating and the
right, and if we think, gosh, if I have more
love
of these
this.
really rude guests at my party, then we have kind of like this, right?
We're off balance, right?
We're off balance.
Mhm.
So that's when you might go, let me do a symbiotic. I probably would start there to
Okay.
be like, oh, let me add some more good people to that party
Right.
and
Okay.
also feed the ones that are already there
Love it.
so they can
Love it.
actually then come up and kind of
Mhm.
boot them out a bit.
Okay. I love that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, right? If we're all at home doing this, as I said, I'm like, oh, we can get in the weeds. We could go there. We can
Yeah,
look at things. But I would only do that with a practitioner that like knows what
exactly.
they're doing and looking for. So if you're at home and you're kind of like, yeah, my party feels off in there,
Mhm.
then that's where I would start in essence for this of like, and just thinking about it and approaching it and going, okay, this is what I use each of those different things for.
Okay, this is a little rabbit hole here, but how
All
would
right.
one find, like, aside from yourself, somebody who has a lot of good information on these sorts of things?
Yeah, so most of the time when I'm kind of, searching in an area, I would look for like a dietitian that does like gut health. That's
Okay,
typically what
so
you'll
you'll
see. Like,
specify that, like, in your profile or your
yep,
okay,
yeah,
all right.
yeah, and by all means, if there's right, if there's someone listening right now who's like, I don't know or whatever, I'm connected. So if there's like, I'm
Yes,
trying to find someone, I really need some support. Like, let me know. I can absolutely, see if I have any connections and
yes.
wherever someone's at.
And
So
your contact information again will be in
thank you. Yeah,
the, notes, the post
yeah,
notes for the episode.
perfect, perfect.
Okay, so now I have a couple
Yep.
questions I wanna ask you that affect myself, okay?
Okay.
So one is heartburn, and I know for a lot of post-ops, they will develop
Yeah.
heartburn, especially if they have the gastric sleeve. So
Mhm.
is heartburn related to this biotic thing?
Can be.
Okay.
Can be. So a couple things that I kind of think through a little bit with this. So one, I kind of think about like, hey, do we have that like imbalance there
Mhm.
of our good and our bad stuff? Because that definitely can reroute our acid. So let's say this, it
Okay.
goes up instead of down.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
some particular bacteria that can do that, such as a lot of people will think of like H. pylori.
Right.
That one will kind of do the same thing, cause a bit more inflammation in your stomach lining, and then start kind of navigating that acid in a little bit different way. And so I also kind of take a look too of just even I'll be honest, like if someone takes like a acid reduction pill to help with this, that
Omeprazole or
omeprazole or even like an antacid, like a Tums, if you're
oh,
taking
yes.
Tums all the time,
Uh-oh.
then that can oftentimes shake up
Uh-oh.
that good bacteria.
Uh-oh.
So I know, right,
Take a
right.
lot of Tums.
So I actually would have someone start off with doing a probiotic
Okay.
actually to help with this. There's and I want to say that there's a couple on the market that are specifically for
I've got my
acid.
pen. I've got my pen handy. Spill the tea on this.
So I'm going, give me, I was like, in my head, I was like, okay, I wasn't quite prepared. And I should say, I'm not, I am not being paid by any company, like
Yeah,
all
yeah.
this good stuff. Like I'm just trying to help people.
Thank you.
Right. So there's one that I think of that is a little bit just for like if I'm concerned about H. pylori or if I had that in the past, I'll do like a pylori plex or a pylori X, I think is the two
Mm,
different products.
mhm.
So that can be helpful for like if you had that in the past and you're like, I kind of think that like never went away. Like I was on several rounds of antibiotics for
Wow.
it. So that's one that I think through. The other one in terms of just like if I'm just thinking of like acid, right,
Mhm,
as a
mm,
whole, then I like seeds symbiotic. That is one that tends to help with kind of like an acid or heartburn that I see. The other one that I think about is what's the name? It's going to come to me. Ooh, 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 ooh. It's with it's with Lactobacillus plantarum. You guys, it'll come to me and
It
I
will
will
come
make
through.
sure I
Oh
will
my
be
God.
like,
Hold
yell it out later.
exactly. You'll be like, "Hey, no problem.
It's
You
so
you
sad
yell
that
it
I know the
yell it when you find it
when
or
I
when
know
you
the
think of it."
when I know the like I'm over here with like my quick Google of like I
I
know it's
totally understand.
Lactobacillus plantarum. I mean, this is the so sad part is I know the strain of
Yeah, 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 I can't
bacteria.
even say that, so when you figure it out, let us know.
Floramint. Floramint.
Morbid.
And it's
Alright.
like mend, like you mend a sock.
Oh,
MEND.
Florament.
Yeah.
Ah, got it. I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you. That is really, really helpful because and I know that, some of it caffeine is a culprit.
Right.
I
Of
very rarely eat chocolate because it gives me almost instant heartburn,
yeah. Yeah.
which
Well,
I'm
and
kinda glad about.
right, right? Yeah, yeah, catch 22 there. Like you're
Yeah,
like,
for
oh,
real.
I'm kind of
Mhm.
glad, but also, oh, acid reflux is so uncomfortable. And
It is.
so sometimes I just, I kind of think through of, yeah, what do I do to kind of just help with that picture? And then if you're doing things, again, I always tell people like your month mark after doing a supplement is usually where you'll start seeing the trajectory change.
Okay.
So meaning that it's never none of these things are like a light switch
Right.
because you're changing a whole environment in there. So if we think
Mm.
about it, it is like a cruise ship that we are changing direction, and that is not going to happen quick.
Oh god. Okay, so now I'm gonna go down this road that we briefly touched on last time
Sure.
because we're talking about changing systems, right?
Yeah.
And I know anytime we take a prescription medicine or probably even a
Yeah.
supplement of any kind, we're altering something going on in there, whether
Hmm.
it's our gut or our, whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever, like heart or blood pressure, whatever.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about GLPs, even though we
Okay.
haven't even brought that
Sure.
up because
Sure.
there's so much talk about. I listened to this
Yeah.
5-part podcast about it, and,
Yeah.
there's concerns about, what are we doing permanently and how is it gonna alter the human
Yeah.
body and
Yeah. Yeah. And rightfully, I mean, I am also like, oh, okay, let me see what's coming up.
yeah,
Not only coming up in practice, just because I see people and I'm kind of like, oh, okay, this is interesting, right? Like,
yes,
oh, okay, this is interesting what's coming up. But then I'm also trying to be like, oh, are we having any research around this? Are we,
right,
do we have anything more robust yet? And honestly, not yet. I can kind of say anecdotally what I've seen and what I've kind of used because it does slow down that motility. Like that's, just think like your digestive tract, how it
mm,
moves things along is kind of like a wave. It makes this little
right,
wave action that we call peristalsis, which
right,
might
okay,
be people might have heard that or not. So I always kind of
yeah,
put it out
yeah,
there, but it's just like it's a little wave and it helps to move your food along.
okay.
Okay. And just think that like that wave then slows down.
So
Okay.
that's one of the things that the GLPs do.
It
GLP
does. Yes,
okay,
yes. Because then, right, it moves your food slower so you get the signal quicker
mhm,
of, hey, I have too much food in my reservoir, so
right,
stop there's no more.
right,
Okay? So it's part of the mechanism of action. It's part of what
okay,
they do.
okay.
But if I think about that and I'm like, oh, well, part of my food is like this scrub brush from my digestive tract. And if that
Mhm.
scrub brush is slower, it's like kind of, becomes a nice, gentle little like reg. that's
Right,
that's
right.
not gonna that doesn't kind of stimulate that like good bacteria as much as I want it to be
Okay. So
stimulated.
that can totally throw
Okay.
off the biome.
So it can totally throw off that biome. And so, right, then I think about it and I go, okay, so then if I have more stomach issues coming up, if I have more, right, things happening. Kind of two parts that I think of is I do think of the fiber. So I go, do we have any fiber in the food that we're eating? Because we're
Mm,
getting in much less food. So
right.
now I got to make sure that I have like support of that scrub brush, like
Ah,
really supporting that.
okay. So
So
let me just interrupt and ask
yeah, of
a question
course.
because my
Yeah.
brain is just like, oh, I'm so fascinated. So if a person goes on like a low calorie diet or a very low calorie diet for
Yeah.
whatever reason, medically supervised, of course,
Yeah.
you would have less food also. So that fiber
Yeah.
piece would be important in a lower calorie
Yes.
diet too.
Yes, absolutely. You're right.
Tracking. Okay.
Yep. And that's why again, like I love the visuals because I think it helps us being a more proactive partner with our bodies.
Right.
Right? Because if I'm like thinking, I'm like, oh wait, I'm trying to clean something and I need like a scrub brush to get like,
Sure.
my toilet ring off
Yes.
there, right? And I'm just like a little rag, and I'm like, oh,
Right.
that's not gonna help
Not
this.
gonna help.
Oh my
Right.
gosh, I need that fiber to really help that.
Okay, beautiful. So in the
Mhm.
case of a GLP-1
Yep.
and it slows things down, so we have to add the
Mhm.
fiber, but it also is not going to increase the good stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So in that case, a what
I
probiotic?
probably would do I probably would do a synbiotic.
Ah, okay,
In that case, again, because I want a little bit of appetizers, I want a little bit of people added to that party. So I would
okay,
lean towards a symbiotic, unless you are a really plant forward person that is like, oh yeah, I know I have a bunch of your prebiotics mainly come from your plants. So if
okay.
you're a plant forward eater, you
Mm.
might go, oh, I got all the appetizers and I need to be a probiotic to just add in those extra people.
So plant forward,
Mhm.
meaning I eat a lot of plants.
Meaning I eat a lot of plants and I have a lot of color on my plate with those plants.
Okay, love it.
So that's what I would say. In meaning like it's not like you're not going to get in a protein, or if you're not going to, you're going to get in a protein, you're going to
Sure.
get in a little bit of carbohydrates. But if you're like, oh man, I have this really nice, robust, colorful like salad, and that's my go-to for my everyday with my protein on there, and I have a little bit of sweet potatoes, which are great for fiber. That you might go, yeah, I'm real forward with that.
You just
I'm
mentioned
good.
all my favorite foods.
Oh,
If you
okay.
give me food on a plate, I'm always gonna eat the veggies or the salad first, always. And my favorite
Oh,
of all is the sweet potato.
I just hit all the
You
major
did,
buttons here.
which brings me to my next question because I do an
Mhm.
interesting thing with sweet potatoes and most of the other
Yeah,
food that I eat
okay.
because I like to add protein where I can. So when I eat a sweet
Yeah.
potato, I load that sucker up with cottage cheese.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm. That's
Yeah,
what I put in my cottage or in instead of whatever else.
yeah,
When my children were
yeah.
little picky eaters, right now they're older than you are, but when they were young, in order to, you know, put in some protein where they weren't gonna go, "Ew,"
Sure,
I would put cottage cheese in everything. We put it in their Kraft macaroni and cheese. I put it in
sure.
eggs. I put it
Yeah.
and they still do it. But my question is dairy.
Ah,
Most of my diet is
mhm,
dairy. I eat cottage cheese all day long. I eat fat free Greek yogurt. And I have skim milk in my iced latte every day. So I know dairy can be an issue, and it
mhm,
is for me at times. So I
mhm,
get lactate products usually.
mhm,
So they're
mhm,
lactose free.
mhm.
But I still think they can cause a little of this biome irritation in the form
Yeah,
of bloating.
they can. They can. With a couple things kind of happens with this dairy part, and I really I don't think it's all like an all or nothing thing really. Um, and it's so individual, right? So we have the lactose part of it, which our body makes a certain enzyme to break down that lactose. And some of us have less than others, which
Mm-hmm.
makes us lactose intolerant.
Right.
And then as we get older, so just think that's like baseline, but as we get older, naturally our body produces less of that enzyme.
Okay. Okay.
So as we go further on in life, if we
Interesting.
were already lactose intolerant kind of early on, then you might notice like, oh, over time, like I'm not being able to do all the things. Like I used to be able to do a little bit of skim milk, and now I'm like, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like one part of just, right, understanding lactose and how our bodies may change in our
Okay.
reaction to it.
Okay.
Then we have the other part here, which is the actual like, okay, am I bloated? Is it my microbiome? Like, what's happening in there?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we absolutely have a difficulty with our dairy and our microbiome. Couple different reasons. If it is too much at once,
Okay.
so too much at once, we get this overload of that system to where it's not all really being able to be broken down so completely.
Are we still talking about
We're
lactose, or
No, we're
just
just talking about dairy in general and that
okay?
microbiome part
Okay.
and piece of it. So if we have too much at once and our microbiome is not equipped for it,
Okay.
which most of us, we kind of know, or we can kind of see like, oh, okay, yeah, I
Yeah.
get uncomfortable here.
Yes.
Then that's just like one part of like, okay, it's just our microbiome isn't equipped for all of that.
Okay.
We have the other part where it is a little bit more inflammatory,
Okay.
kind of like a marker or tells our gut lining to inflame a little bit
Okay.
more. And
Okay.
just think inflammation, I think of it kind of like a puffy coat our body puts on to protect itself.
Look at you. I love that. Love a
Okay.
puffy coat too.
Right? All right.
Mhm.
So just think like, right? So if it's something that is a signal to our gut lining that goes, hey, this is going to be rocky or this is going to be rough or, right? We might go, okay, I'm not just wearing the thinnest sweater possible. I don't know. Could be rough. I'm going to put on a puffy coat during that
Right.
digestion process
Okay.
and extends a bit afterwards to
Okay.
be able to help it. And we're talking about like microbiome and bacteria, but we also have like layers of our gut lining that also has this like signaling part of the house of says like,
Okay.
hey body, okay, gosh, this is going to be a bit tough. Throw
Yeah.
on that puffy coat. So we also have the
Okay.
communication
Okay.
part of it too, which I think is that takes us a little bit different edge than
Right.
just
Right.
the bacteria. But
Mhm.
that's why I go, this one isn't like such a straightforward answer because there's several things kind of happening
Okay.
at
Okay.
once.
Okay. So, because I know dairy gets a bad rap in some circles, and I'm like,
Yeah.
if I didn't eat dairy, there would be 3/4 of my menu gone.
Yeah. I think in part what I kind of look at when it comes to dairy or where I make some decisions and there's absolutely individuals decisions too. Like there are people where I'm like, oh, dairy's not a good choice for you. We do need to take that out. It's a
Mhm.
complete individual decision. But if I'm looking in general, I'm more looking at like, okay, within that dairy, how much fat content
Mhm.
do I have in
Mhm.
that?
Mhm.
Because that's going to just take it a little bit
Sure.
different.
Right.
I look at like what other components does it have in it. So like, right, cottage cheese is a really great source of protein. And so I have that protein component to it and
Mhm.
I lessen down on my fat
Right.
content. I have a better balance with that
Mhm.
versus just being a higher fat dairy product, which is harder for our bodies and signals more
Okay.
of that puffy coat.
Problematic behavior. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where I kind of look at like some of my decision making with this is like,
Sure.
right, hey, what are my choices within the umbrella of dairy?
Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, well, thank you for answering those questions. All right, now let's get to that insulin resistance piece and the
Yeah.
biome.
Yeah.
'Cause
So
I'm drawing a blank here, I know nothing.
yeah. So what, I love the microbiome, especially now because like people are paying attention to it. We are learning so much
Oh,
more about it. We are seeing that like there's other things that are happening in there besides just like eat food,
right.
have a party. Okay. So
Food
there's
party, yeah.
right, there's much more to it that we're actually seeing now. And so I mentioned kind of this other aspect of like the signaling. Okay.
Mhm.
So, we used to think of our microbiome as just like, yep, okay, like it is just a part of that digestion process. It breaks things down, it moves things along. We
Right,
know we need a scrub brush in there every once in a while, and that's all it does. And we thought of it very on its own and very insular. Okay.
right.
Now, what we're recognizing is that it has that communication part to it. We
Okay.
always knew there was a communication of like gut and brain. We've known that for a while, and I know someone had asked about that too, and I'm happy to mention a little bit about that too as well.
Yes.
But we also now second part of communication is that now we're like, oh, it actually communicates with our other messengers in our body. Okay. And so think of your messengers as your hormone in your cell system.
Okay.
Okay. So
Right,
hormone, and I think insulin's a hormone.
right.
So, okay. So that are hormones. Those are messengers all throughout our body. Okay.
Right, okay.
So when we look at that microbiome, there's certain bacteria that actually message to our cells
Okay,
that take up insulin. Okay. And so
okay,
when we start talking about insulin and insulin resistance, I think my best visual of just insulin resistance as a whole,
okay.
okay, is
Mhm.
that whenever we eat, no matter what we eat,
Right,
honestly, whenever we eat, insulin is released to help partner up with sugar in our blood system. And
okay,
then they go to a particular cell that
okay,
helps to take up that insulin and some of that sugar. Okay.
okay.
And insulin resistance just means when they go to that cell and they knock on the door, that door stays locked
Wow,
and
okay.
it resists
I love
it
it.
coming in.
Do not
Okay.
come in, right,
Yeah. So
no insulin allowed.
right, right. So I think when people think insulin resistance, I've known for a lot of people that I work with that it'll be like, okay, well, what's the difference between high blood sugar, low blood sugar, resistance versus diabetes versus,
Yeah,
and then I'm like, whew, it all gets really like right in the weeds there.
right.
But that's why I was just like, if we think of insulin resistance as like we go right, it goes to that
Love
cell. It's like I got my partner sugar here. It's me,
that, right.
insulin. We're knocking on the door. We usually come in,
Mhm,
and now that door can't fully open.
okay. To either
Okay,
one of those things,
to
because 'cause they're
either
part.
one of those things.
Okay.
So then that's why we see someone's blood sugar
Mm,
higher
okay.
because it's hanging out. It's like, well, we couldn't get in there.
Oh,
Let's just
okay.
okay, right?
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. So when
You're
we're
good.
so right, like, and so that's what that kind of difference like is, or that's what's happening, okay, with
Okay.
insulin resistance. So when we start seeing this communication part with our gut microbiome and
Mhm.
insulin resistance, and I will be honest, they have more to learn. So, right. So I'm like, what we see
Sure.
is we kind of see, so I don't know all the like the ins and outs because I it just is also one of those things that we
Right.
don't know yet. But what we see together is that when that microbiome is off, and they've pinpointed certain bacteria,
Uh-huh.
but when it's off,
Mhm.
that signals and that tells those cells, hey, keep your doors closed.
Oh, wow.
So we see more of that insulin resistance.
Yes.
And then when we help improve that microbiome
Oh,
and
that's
those certain ones,
great.
it tells the cells, oh, open your doors.
Wow, that's critical. That is huge.
Yeah. So that's why we're now going, oh, whoa, this is so much more important than just like eat food, have a party, our microbiome's
Yeah.
happy. We do
Yeah.
want our microbiome to be happy, but that's what we're recognizing of like, oh, wait, hold on. It also tells our other communication system there too.
Dang, that's
So,
fascinating. So, if you've been diagnosed with insulin resistance, you definitely want to talk with a dietitian who understands the gut biome because there could
mhm,
be some assistance in
absolutely.
that arena.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because that part,
Interesting.
again, we're just like, right? You want to look at all the different parts and pieces of this
Yeah,
because why not? Right? Like, why
absolutely.
not? And we go, we could help that.
So, insulin is a hormone,
Yep.
and men and women have insulin,
Hmm.
but they have some separate hormonal issues as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of women will say when their hormones change during menopause or postmenopausal
Hmm.
that their bodies change.
Hmm.
So, what's the connection between all of that and the gut, those hormones?
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say, oof, menopause and then body change, and that's a whole hormone conversation. So I'm gonna definitely pinpoint us of like the gut and like hormones and especially
Okay.
estrogen.
Okay.
Okay,
Let's talk about the gut
because
and estrogen.
because right, you not only said like, hey, we see it in like menopause or perimenopause, right? But we also for people who are having a cycle. We also may see shifts like right before that cycle. Like, so
I'm
like
sure.
estrogen, right? As estrogen shifts to say, okay, have a period, then we'll often, for a lot of people, they'll go, before my period for 2 days, I'm really much more bloated or my bowel movements look different. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
there's some different stuff that kind of happens. And
Mhm.
all of that has to do with the shift in estrogen.
Okay.
Okay. So, part of our microbiome
Uh-huh.
helps to make a certain enzyme. Okay.
Okay.
So, think of enzymes like scissors.
Okay.
Okay. So, it helps to make an enzyme that helps to break down and utilize estrogen. Okay, so I'm going to back up for a second to like
Okay.
explain this a little bit clearer. All right. So when we are breaking down like our estrogen in that process, okay.
Mhm.
So what happens is right that's all through our system and it goes through our liver. That's kind of the second point of breakdown, and our body kind of packages up that estrogen, and that estrogen, the last point of breakdown, is it goes through our digestive tract,
Okay. Wow.
right? I know. Wow. This
Wow.
is this is why before our
Interesting.
period. You're seeing, oh, I'm kind of bloated, or yeah, my bowel movements look different. Or as that estrogen is shifting because of perimenopause and menopause,
Okay.
then we're seeing some of that shifting in terms of our just not only digestion sometimes, but even where kind of some of our like weight is.
Interesting.
So just so we have that little package of estrogen,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going through our gut,
Mm-hmm.
and part of our microbiome makes these special scissors just for that
Okay.
package.
Wow.
Okay. And these scissors cut that package in half.
Okay.
Okay. And half of that goes back into the system.
Okay.
Okay. So half of that estrogen goes back in to help with someone who's cycling, that goes back
Okay.
into the cycle.
Okay.
Or if someone's transitioning perimenopause, menopause, then it's less of that amount of estrogen, but it goes back into that system.
Okay.
Okay. The other half is supposed to go out to the trash.
Okay.
Okay. So where I start seeing where kind of this microbiome, right, is important
Okay.
is a couple of reasons. So if our microbiome is off, then it might make some extra scissors.
Oh, so now we're getting rid of too much of,
Too
or too
much
much, or too little.
or too little. So that's what I was going to say. So it might make these extra scissors to where
Mm-hmm.
we have more broken off pieces.
Right.
And typically we'll see that we get more going and recycling into that system.
Okay.
So see this sometimes with like endometriosis or PCOS.
Oh,
So
wow.
that tend to lean a little bit on the higher estrogen side. I pay
Oh,
attention because
wow.
I'll want to look at the microbiome. Also, in that case of like, are we making too much scissors?
Absolutely.
Or let's say someone's microbiome is off and they're more constipated. So we have that, it cut it right in half, and we have the part
Right.
that's supposed to go out to the trash.
Right.
And then we have the part that's supposed to be recycled.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, if we're a bit more constipated because our microbiome's off, that trash stays around a little bit longer than it should.
Okay.
And like when you make a pile of like donation items and it just
Right.
sits in your house and you're like, oh, then a couple of days later, you're like, that's kind of cute. I don't know if I should get rid of that.
Yeah.
Let me take that back in.
Oh,
And
gosh.
so what happens is that part that's intended for the trash gets brought into the recycling a bit more. And we
Okay.
have more going back into the system. And so that microbiome part, and I'll mention this term just because people may have heard about it. Um, that microbiome part that helps make those scissors is actually called the estrobolome. So estrogen
Right.
and then biome, estrobolome.
Wow.
So that's where our connection of like sex hormones, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll even say for those that, for those that have more male hormones, right? There's still estrogen production
Mm-hmm.
as well. So I honestly think of this system too. If someone is coming to me and going, hey, I kind of feel like and it's usually a month, and they'll go, gosh, I kind of feel like I get a little bit moodier every month. Like they're not having, a system of kind of bleeding that shows a shift in this. But definitely people who have more male hormones, definitely like it's I can say you
Okay.
can see some system changes in how estrogen is broken down and used or reused. So
So,
did I open a can of worms, Connie?
mm, yeah, because now I'm thinking of birth control pills.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking there's no more flow, right? There's people don't bleed. They're still cycling.
Yeah.
Is that a microbiome thing? Does that affect the microbiome or
So, uh, and I'm pausing because I was just like, this is actually a really complicated question, and
oh boy.
I want to break this down as thoughtfully as possible because I was like, oh, we could just talk hormones all day. So
Mhm.
with like a birth control, and there's all different right types. So really, with a birth control that um, has that puts hormones into someone's system, okay,
Mhm.
what our system kind of does is it goes, oh, hey, I don't need to produce my own hormones
Mhm.
because they're being provided.
Okay.
Okay. So they kind of like do that kind of part. Um, Again, this system can, for individuals, can get muddied and messed up, and that's why I would be like, oh, work with a practitioner, especially if you're like, I'm on a
Exactly.
birth control pill and I'm spotting at this time and I'm not bleeding like that. I'm like, oh, okay, we need to look at your system.
Right.
Okay. But if I'm just speaking straightforward, that's what kind of happens. So we still get, within that like hormonal kind of, whether it's a pill or an IUD or whatever, that hormonal birth control system, you're still getting an estrogen breakdown. It's just a really much more, it's a controlled. So it's
Okay.
not like uh it's not where it can fluctuate like we'll see with someone's natural like hormones that their body produces. So when I can say like, hey, if someone's on something that they don't bleed, it just might be like, oh, we're not having enough of a shift in our
Mhm.
progesterone and estrogen to signal, okay, I need to bleed. But the process still works of the like, oh, it goes through the gut and there's a package and there's scissors. That
Okay.
all still is happening.
Okay. So it
Yeah.
can alter things, but
Can alter things, but typically what I'm kind of looking at is that, like, I know that there's a controlled amount hormonally that's happening. And then I'm looking at the gut as a whole to go, okay, well, what's happening within there? Or what did we have happening before someone went
right.
on a birth control? And do we need to repair that? And then eventually they came off their birth control because that's their desire.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of, just things that can happen within there. But yeah, it's a complicated question.
Well, here's another complicated one that may or may not have anything to do with gut biome,
Okay,
but
talk to me.
a lot of times birth control, and the one that I'm most familiar with that like an instantaneous weight gain, is that Depo-Provera.
Mm-hmm.
Is gut biome in any way directly related to weight gain or loss or susceptibility?
It can be. So when you throw in a hormonal piece to
Mhm.
this puzzle, it's not usually like one or the other. It's kind of a combo.
Right.
But here's what I can say is that our gut microbiome can influence weight for some people because we have quite a few things going on in there, right?
Obviously.
It's our detoxification kind of system, right? Things are going out to the trash. We have our signaling system, whether that's insulin, whether that's other hormones, whether that is inflammation, so we have a signaling system going on in
Yeah,
there.
right.
We also might have to where, right, our good and our not good or our bad stuff is off. So
Mhm.
that weight part is a byproduct of that bad or not so good stuff because we're
Yeah.
bloated a lot.
Ah,
And that feels like weight and that shows up like weight.
right, right.
So So that's why I go, great question. I go with the hormonal piece because hormones themselves are messengers. So sometimes
True.
on their own, when those are off, they're like, hey, body, like, oh, okay, don't lose weight or gain weight in a certain area to be protective.
Okay.
Um, and that can be its own signal. And then our gut can be its own signal. And we have those two together. That's where it kind of feels absolutely understandably frustrating, where it's like, I just don't feel well and my hormones are off. And then also like I'm seeing some weight gain, like, I mean,
Right.
it could all be really not great feelings. So that's why I answer your question with like kind of a grain of salt of like, it can, but there's a lot of things
For
happening.
sure.
So I'm always trying to like piece it out of like, okay, who's telling what whom?
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense to me why there's so much attention now being paid to this gut biome and understanding it. Because when you're
Mhm.
talking about our hormones and we're talking about all the food that we making changes to that gut biome, which are going
Yeah.
to in turn affect the hormones and in turn affect the connection between the mind and the body. My God, no wonder we have to know
Yeah. Yeah.
so much more about this.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a really fascinating and exciting subject, and that's why I'm always truthful to tell people. I was like, there's some stuff that we're seeing that we're like, oh, we see this connected, but we just don't know how or why quite yet. We hope to get there, but I mean, we're definitely like this is much more of a robust subject than it was 10 years ago.
For sure.
you know?
The gut biome, would it be fair to say it's a communication center or that it's a regulatory kind of thing? I mean,
I would say yes to, I mean, yes to both. It's almost like even like an air traffic control center, like,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Because
There's
it's
a lot going on
a
there.
lot going on. So it
Yeah,
is, and
absolutely.
it is absolutely of going like, okay, like we can regulate, but you have to think too that I always think bodies are so fascinating and
I know.
typically they will adapt because they're like,
Right.
"Oh, I'm trying to protect something or I need to do
Correct.
something different because
Seek balance.
something over here is going off."
Mhm.
So that's where I'm like, oh, it literally is a traffic control center because sometimes it's like, oh, no, you can't land. I'm going to tell you over here
Yeah.
keep circling because we got to deal with something over here. So there's a lot of communication regulation and then also an actual job that it does.
Yeah, exactly. Boy, it's a fascinating topic. And then there's that whole, which we don't have time for today, but we may
Right.
have to have a part three because there's that whole dopamine and serotonin thing, and a lot
Uh-huh.
of that is produced in the gut,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
right?
Yes. A
So
whole
depression,
bunch.
anxiety,
Yep. Neurotransmitters.
yeah,
Yeah.
and all of you've probably read Dopamine Nation.
So I actually haven't read that book, but I'm familiar with it. And
Yeah,
so but it's just absolutely, yeah, no, I mean, it is.
yeah,
We are trying to, all of us trying to get some sort of like, okay, how do we make sure that those are regulated?
exactly. And then there's all the things that we know now about how constant electronic stuff affects those neurotransmitters. So there's got to be a
Mhm.
connection with the gut there. Wow. It's like the body is a
Mhm.
really fascinating thing, isn't it? And like you said, our bodies work really hard on our behalf to find balance, that homeostasis,
It does.
you know. And fortunately, there are some ways we can give it a little assist because we don't always take
Yeah.
the best care of ourselves.
Yeah.
So the pre, the post, the symbiotic, and the post no, and let's
You got
see,
it. Yeah.
pre pro, the symbiotic, and the postbiotics are all supplemental options, but you've got to talk to
Yeah.
somebody who knows what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. I really, again, great things is that like, oh, we're so much more well equipped now than
Exactly.
we have been before, which is really cool.
Mhm.
But it just helps for us to really kind of conceptualize and like
I
understand.
swear, I cannot think of an hour that's gone by quicker than this. It just draws me in so much.
I know. That's why I told you from the start. I was like, "Oh, Connie, we could talk for days," and I
Yes, you
know
did.
we will just
Now I
chat
know.
away.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is ask people who are listening to this to submit more questions
Yes,
so
please.
that Katie can continue to educate us on this critical function of our body and how different things and there are no I mean, there are some answers, but there's a lot of questions as well. But having an understanding of this can really be beneficial and
Yeah,
help us alleviate some problems
yeah,
that we may inadvertently, like that whole insulin resistance. What a huge thing. It's like, knock, knock, please open up. Well, get your biome straightened out a little bit and we'll talk about that.
yeah, yeah. And there's absolutely that's why I'm like, there's other things that I can affect that door closing, but I think insulin resistance is we hear the term, but we don't know what that means. So that's why I was just like, I wanted to give everyone that visual of like,
That is
this
so
is what's
good.
happening.
Yeah.
That's what that is. And then, hey,
Yeah,
let's look at all the pieces to connect this. But
definitely.
I definitely think probably next time, because we didn't get to it, but like the whole gut brain
Yes, that is.
connection.
I have so much interest in that. Okay, part 3, that's for part 2 time. But
So that's what
also,
that
everybody
means.
give us your
Please.
questions in case
Yes.
something, came to mind while we're going through this. Katie, thank you so much.
My
I
pleasure.
literally have to run, so I will
You know you
contact you
do.
later, okay?
We'll talk. I know.
Oh, thank you so much, you guys. Thank you for listening and your interest in this
Yes.
topic. It's beautiful.
Yes. Oh, thank
All right,
you. Thank
talk
you.
soon.
I'll
All
talk
right,
to you later. See you, everyone.
bye-bye.
Bye.